Hello and welcome. In this video, I wanted to talk about counseling and conducting critical conversations with adult students. And when we're looking at this, it really requires educators to have a very nuanced understanding of the adult learners' unique experiences. They come into post-secondary education with different backgrounds, and some of them from different areas, not only of the country, but areas of the world. And not only that, but different backgrounds as it relates to how they grew up as well. So there's a lot of nuance here that really makes things a little bit different than early childhood education. So things like motivations and challenges are going to be a little bit different, unlike younger students. Adult learners really juggle academic responsibilities with personal and professional commitments. They're usually working full time, they have families, they have kids that are doing this. So this is going to create a different dynamic when we're looking at these learners. When we're looking at effective counseling for these students, it really hinges on having the right timing, making sure the student's ready for this conversation. And that's going to be one of the big things there, how we approach this conversation. And then being sensitive to their life context. And that's why knowing the student is going to be a big part of this. When we're looking at this, I want to see the best practices for you in counseling adult students that's grounded in research, so that way you understand what are some of the best ways to approach this situation. So context, this is going to be the big one. Adult learners bring a wealth of life experience to the educational environment. That's an asset. That's something that we can see and bring to better discussions within the classroom. Now, their background, their different life experiences often shapes their learning styles too, and how they expect a classroom to be ran. If you run a classroom differently than how they've had it in the past, that can be pretty jarring to some of those students as well. So a lot of these adult learners face multiple responsibilities as well, including work and family and financial concerns. All of those things, that family and financial and work stuff going into those concerns, can really impact their academic performance as well as their emotional well-being. So understand they have this complex background of work, family, financial, all these extra responsibilities we don't see with elementary or secondary education really impacts their performance, and then also their mental health, emotional health as well. Educators, we need to recognize these factors, and we need to tailor our efforts to address their unique challenges that they're facing. So, according to the Knowles theory in 1980, right there, adult learners are self-directed and motivated by internal factors, which we should keep in mind during our critical conversations, that they have different motivations, and that's something that understanding can really help you a long way with helping these students out. What about timing? Timing is everything. It's very critical when you're engaging in a critical conversation with an adult student. Educators, we need to aim to counsel when a student is open and emotionally prepared to receive feedback or guidance. So if they seem upset, if they seem like they're not going to accept that guidance or that feedback, that may not be the time to do it. You may want to schedule an office time with them, or a time to talk to them later when they are ready to and emotionally ready to get that feedback or that guidance. This means that we need to have a very proactive approach. We need to identify the potential issues with these students before they start to escalate into larger concerns. So when you see little things, it's a good thing to ask them how they're doing in that category, or what support we can provide for them. What barriers do they have? Is it something they need help getting through? Is it something they're struggling with that we might have resources for? So identifying these potential issues early before they escalate to larger concerns can really help them from behavioral, emotional, and even making life decisions that they may not have wanted to make. The Schlossberg's transition theory really emphasizes that adult learners, that they undergo life changes. Returning to education as an adult is a big experience of stress, and The big thing here is making sure that we understand that timely support can make a significant difference in their success. So if they keep going through all this stuff and they're not getting help, it snowballs and snowballs and get worse. And what we see is the earlier we intervene, the better for them. But do make sure, even though we want to intervene early, that they're still ready to have that conversation. They got to be open and emotionally prepared to have that feedback. What about the environment? This is a big part here. We need to create an atmosphere of trust and respect with our students. It's important to know before you start this critical conversation that they can trust and they have that hope that you're there to help them. Adult learners, they need to feel that you value their perspective and their experiences. That's one of the big things that needs to come across, is how much you value their background and their experiences. Brookfield suggests that adult learners, they thrive in environments where their opinions are validated and their contributions to learning are respected. So when you do have a discussion, when you do talk to these students, when you have them in open discussion in the classroom, for an example, thank them for their contributions, thank them for their opinions. These are big things that go along with helping these students succeed and making sure that they hear that they are valued in their backgrounds and their different perspectives. We need to foster an environment for these students that makes sure that their critical conversations, when we do have to have those, are constructive and they don't seem punitive. So when you do have a critical conversation, make sure that you're some way making sure that they understand this is not to give them a punitive result. This is meant to help them through the situation, to help them with what's going on. And so they understand that they can trust that you're not there just to be another obstacle in their education, but you're actually there to help them with their obstacles in education. This brings to the next point, empathy and objectivity. This is a tough balance. And when you're counseling adult students, it's vital for educators to strike a balance between empathy and objectivity. We need to understand the personal challenges that they are going through, but you also need to maintain academic standards and accountability. We can't change our standards and accountability for a student over here compared to a student over there. That's not fair and equitable to these students. These critical conversations should acknowledge their circumstances that they're going through without excusing a subpar behavior or subpar performance. We're training them to be those professionals out there. So we need to have them reach the standards of the professionals out there, and making sure that they have that, but also understand that they're heard is a good point and a good balance to strike here. And then this is where we get Goleman's emotional intelligence framework that tells us that educators who demonstrate empathy while maintaining a clear expectation are better able to motivate students toward improvement. And so, in other words, you're not just there for empathy. Yeah, you're there to provide a bit of empathy for the student, but you're also there to coach them along, to help them through this obstacle as well. So you're not there to take away the obstacle, you're there to help them through that. And then make sure that you're not being the obstacle at the same time. So how do we approach? What's the communication approach to this? The approach to critical conversation should vary based upon the individual student's personality. This is something that only you, knowing the student in the classroom, can really tailor to the specific communication style or the challenges that that individual student has. Some students, they may respond well to direct feedback and they're going to be thankful for that, while others, they may need more gradual, gentle approach to the feedback. So this is, before you think about this critical conversation, which approach would this student tend to probably do better with? And that's something to make sure that you have on your checklist before you have this conversation with them. When we're looking at the transformative learning theory, that suggests that adult learners undergo significant shifts in understanding when they engage in reflective discourse. So reflective discourse is different. It makes it essential for us to use questioning techniques that promote self-reflection and critical thinking during the sections. So it shouldn't be you just giving a lecture, once again giving a lecture, once again giving a lecture. It's you asking students about what's going on to have them self-reflect and making sure that they're critically thinking about what triggered this situation, how they approached it, what caused them to approach it the way that they did. Those are the important things. So this is not your time to lecture. This is your time to ask them questions and have them reflect on what happened so they can see more clearly what's going on. Ooh, so what about resistance? What about students that tend to get defensive? Well, adult learners, sometimes they react defensively to critical conversations. I think almost everyone can go into this one, especially if they feel that their competence is being questioned. Hey, I'm a competent adult. You don't need to tell me this is wrong, or so on and so forth. When we're looking at this, we need to be prepared to handle this resistance by framing our feedback in a constructive manner. Once again, not punitive, but a constructive manner. Now, do we still hold them to standards? Absolutely. But they need to understand that this conversation is not meant to be punitive. Could it involve punitive as such as points or, different things there? Yeah, absolutely. But they still need to see it's time to frame it as a manner of let's get better through this situation. So frame it in a constructive manner and focus on the specific behaviors rather than personal attributes. If you go after personal attributes, then you're attacking them is how it comes across. And that's not anybody's intention, I don't think. And so when we're looking at this, we need to make sure that it's very constructive, very specific to what's going on and not just attributes. When we look at this, non-judgmental approach in counseling really fosters a lot of self-growth, and it reduces defensive reactions. And this means the student's going to be more open to a productive dialogue. So this means when you frame this, to avoid a lot of resistance and a lot of defensiveness, make sure your approach is put together appropriately. So when we're looking at this, hey, what type of questions am I going to ask them? How am I going to frame this? How do I make sure that they understand that this is meant for their benefit, for their constructive benefit, for them to grow through the situation? Think about these things before this conversation has started, and if you even want to make a list about how you want to do it and practice it to yourself, these are things that will help with this conversation. All right, self-reflection and problem solving. Self-reflection is a big one for all humans, not just humans with critical conversations, but making sure that we have the idea of how we got here and what happened in that scenario and what we could do differently. One of the goals of critical conversation should be to empower adult learners to become better problem solvers. You're helping them for the future, not only for the present, but also for the future. And we should encourage the students to reflect on their actions and consider alternative solutions. What could have been done differently in that scenario? Why, what was the other thing that you could have done there? This aligns with a dialogue education, which really emphasizes the importance of empowering learners to take an active role in resolving their challenges through reflection and critical thinking. So what are some things that you could have done differently there? That's where you're empowering them. Then you're not just saying, I want you to do it this way. You're helping them, what went on there, and then how could you do it differently next time? Right? And this is where that's going to help them in the big long run. So if it does happen again, hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, they have a better game plan for what to do. What type of feedback do we need to give these students for critical conversations to be effective? Our feedback needs to be very specific. It needs to be actionable, and it needs to be linked to clear expectations. They need to know what the expectations are of that behavior, of that way of acting. So very vague or generalized feedback can really confuse and be very demotivating to an adult student. When we're looking at this feedback model, most effective student feedback provides clarity on where the student stands, so tell them where they stand, what's expected. Hey, these are the expectations that we have for you. And then here are the steps required to bridge that gap between your current performance and your desired outcomes. So we need to be clear and actionable, all right? What's something that happened? Where do you stand? This is what the expectation is. This is where you're currently at, and what steps do we need to do to get there? This is where you need to be with this conversation to make sure that it has a clear and actionable resource. So what about follow-up? Do you usually just have one conversation about whatever happened and then move on and nothing ever happens again? Probably not. A single counseling session is often very insufficient for addressing very complex challenges that our adult learners face. We talked about this earlier, where some of these people are balancing their work, their family, school, right, and finances, all this stuff on top of each other makes it very complex. So this means that we need to provide ongoing support and follow-up to make sure these students are making progress. That's something that's very hard to do, but please do something to put a reminder to follow up with these students when you have these critical conversations. How are you doing with these things? These are great things to make sure that not only that you're following up with them, but that they feel valued in what's going on, that they have that support. When you're communicating continuously, whether through scheduled check-ins or informal discussions, it really enforces your commitment to the student's success. And that's a big thing. That builds that trust, that builds that hope that someone is there to help them succeed and be a big part of their life, even as an adult learner. So when we're looking at the retention theory, it makes sure that the importance of sustained support in helping students, that's something crucial to navigate their academic and personal challenges. Sometimes they may not feel support from their family. If they're spending less time with their family, if they're spending less time with their friends as adult students, then they might actually feel quite the opposite. They might feel like they're letting their friends and their family down. And this is a time to engage that support to help understand this is a different part of their life, and they will be able to go back to it eventually, but this is a crucial part in their development so they can be that better family member, they can be that better friend, they can be that better provider for their family. So what's the conclusion to all of this? Counseling and critical conversations with adult learners really requires a deep understanding of their unique needs and their challenges. So make sure you understand what are your unique needs, what are your unique challenges, and have that in mind. Don't just have a generic thing in mind. Make sure you understand where the student's coming from. We need to approach these conversations with empathy, making sure that it's the right time for these conversations. Like I said, if they're in a very emotional state, we may have to schedule a time to come in and talk about it again. Making sure that you're also, when you're communicating, you have a clear strategy to maintain academic standards, right? Very much so, we need to maintain their academic standards. Otherwise, they could abuse that trust. The other thing is making sure when you have these conversations, you foster a supportive environment. Make sure that your questions encourage self-reflection. Like I said, most of the conversation shouldn't be you talking. It should be asking questions that have them reflect on themselves. And then make sure you give them feedback. Follow up on these conversations. Hey, I know we talked last week about this. Hey, let's schedule time next week to follow up on this, and schedule time to follow up on this, and follow through with it, even if it's formal or informal. Follow through with it. They need to know that you're there as part of their team. We as educators can really help adult learners overcome obstacles and achieve their academic goals. So if we ground these practices into our adult learning, our adult learning, it really means that these conversations are not only effective but also transformative. That's one of our goals, is to help these people become the best version of themselves they can be. And that's one of the big benefits of being an educator, is seeing that growth and seeing that change and being part of helping that happen. All right, well, thank you for joining me in this. Here's a list of my references. And once again, hopefully this was some help to you.